event. Feel free to bring food and drink in here, but like I said, remember to take it back out and throw it away. I'm the founder, Lauren. If we love people joining our organization, we love them trying to do stuff. So anyone wants to be a part of us, let us know. Effie, are you going to sit? I have a seat for you. And he's sitting over there too. Okay, sorry. We have a Microsoft Reactor, one of the Microsoft people is from there today, and he's come loading down with a bunch of really cool VR headsets, which he's going to give out. And at the end of this, Sigrid is going to take a bunch of people across the street to Heartland Brewery. You could actually see it out the window if you want to continue talking with the panelists and you want to just have more discussion and stuff. And I'm going to turn this over to Oliver, who's our moderator, and he's going to go through a bunch of quick things. But before I do that, I'm going to have Jim Williams come and thank our sponsors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Again, I hear so many people here talk about pulling this all together and getting such a phenomenal panel list. Great job. Well done. My job is to thank our sponsors and the people who were involved in helping put this all together. Most notably, McCarter and English, LLP. Wonderful people, been very, very supportive for our organization, very supportive of every step along the way, and we can't do this without them. Of course, Microsoft Reactor, and we'll hear more about what they do, but it's really an organization where people can come together and exchange ideas, exchange thoughts, network, and they always like to point out it doesn't have to be based on Microsoft products. So they really do want to just encourage the culture, encourage the technology, encourage creative thought. Triana Group, which is advisors for financially growing businesses, they are very, very attuned to small companies and their challenges as they grow and as they build their organizations, and they've been tremendous help to their clients. Of course, Hint Water. Hint's been with us for many, many, many years now, and we just thrilled that they have been continuing to be part of this. With a public accounting firm, again, another financial services company, both help with organizations, personal and global operations. And our newest sponsor, Express Communications, and we'll get to hear a little bit more about them, but they are very much in tune with secure communications and their whole structure to allow people to transfer information, to communicate, to do all those things in a secure and safe fashion. And finally, I'd like to thank all of the Disruptive Technologist volunteers. You'll see them in the white T-shirts with the logo on the back. Without them, this really doesn't happen. And they are all volunteers, so we'd really like to thank them as well. And with that, I will turn it over to, I think, Imran, right? No.
Well, Oliver's going to introduce.
Oh, Oliver's going to, sorry, Oliver. Oliver's going to introduce the rest of the group. Come on up, Oliver. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Well, thank you and welcome to Disruptive Technologies. Thank you for coming and to hear about the future of artificial intelligence, ethics, and what we should be doing next. Before that, though, let's have a Microsoft Reactor giveaway. We have 10 Microsoft headsets to give away to all you lovely people. So, Imran, do you want to? There it is.
Wrong Imran. This is my colleague, Sep. Hey, everybody. My name is Imran Anwar. I am, can you hold that for a second? So I'm really happy to welcome you to Microsoft here at 11 Times Square, and delighted to be on the panel. And I'm a learner at all, so I'm really looking forward to learning from so many smart people in the room. And the only thing I would love to have you think about is, with all the technology becoming available to you today, the opportunity for you to change the world is so democratically equal to all of you in the room and all of us in the room. And anything that you do, try to drive the innovation agenda, try to improve customer experiences so that it makes the world a better place in the long run. That's my ask. Sep.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sep. I'm on the developer audience team for Microsoft, and we work very closely with the Reactor, and that's our venue sponsor for tonight. As we already said, the Microsoft Reactor is just a place for a lot of community members, especially technology members, to come and meet regardless of a Microsoft agenda or a Microsoft partnership or anything like that. It's just a really open and inclusive space for someone to come and mingle with people like-minded. Thanks.
So we figure to make things exciting and to also hearken the start of this brave new world of AI and a whole lot of other exciting technologies. We'll have some gifts to give away, and I think everybody's got their names in the glass bowl.
Everyone gave a business card in the fish bowl.
Okay.
Yes.
Shall we do a drawing for the first one?
Yeah, let's do it.
I'll do it simply because I'm standing here and it's easier for me. And it's easier to pull the ones who paid me $100 outside. Hey, you know, exactly. Wow, Imran Anwar. I'm just kidding. Can you read that?
Oh, I can't.
Your first initial is Z and your last initial is S. And you have a gmail.com address.
Oh my goodness.
Is that Z-S-U-S-H?
Zufta?
Zlata?
Close enough for government work.
Yeah, that's
Here we go. That's yours. Let's settle this one. Good luck reading that one. He took $100 from the people who gave out cards.
Benjamin Semoff? What it is? Did we say? It's a surprise.
Can't open this one.
So in these boxes is a virtual reality headset, and then the second smaller box is the joysticks with it that you could develop on multiple different platforms and technologies.
You'll do this one.
sorry. Okay, Devin Dadigan.
Because Lauren is the unsung hero here.
Okay, Mindy Perlmutter.
Yeah, how many? We'll know when we run out of boxes.
I was just
Call yourself right. That's right.
I'll have Effie pull one.
we're so inclusive.
We have Jake White here. Jake White.
Jake.
Notice how he was strategically sitting very close to where the stuff was. So, you want to pull another?
Oh, sure. It's an easy one. Jenna Evans. Oh, very good.
We'll bring some business cards up. With my luck, I'll probably get the next one that's unreadable.
Doesn't get worse.
It doesn't. It's actually a very interesting name. It's 91623. Smith.
That's
Mr.
me.
Smith.
Andrew?
Yeah.
Agent Smith.
It's like my social security.
3 more to go. 1 more. Got a card.
I know, I'm happy. Michael Wolf.
There's something going on here. Like, there.
I like the feel of this car.
Get your.
Thank you very much.
So we're staying inclusive and also including the panel.
Ludovic Mullen?
Oh, my God.
So you guys shared one, right? So you guys can share one. Okay. Conflict of interest.
Yes. Robert B. Hauser.
There is one more.
One more.
There's no more. I don't see any fit.
Oh, hold on. You'll get the bowl. That's it.
So those headsets were from the Microsoft Reactor. Lauren's going to send out a survey afterward asking you about the event, the venue, and all of that. So especially those people who got a headset, fill out that survey. And everyone else, of course. Thanks. I'll turn it back over to Owen.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So the people who got headsets, check in with us. We'd love to see what you make, what you're creating, what you're building with them. So come and check in with us. Now, firstly, I'm going to go over the format. It's very straightforward. We've done the giveaway. We're going to have a special speaker for 10 minutes, Symon. Symon, you're up.
All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name's Symon Perriman. I come here representing Express, and I'm also a former Microsoft employee. So one of the reasons why I wanted to come up and speak today is I spent about 8 years at Microsoft designing the underlying infrastructure which creates artificial intelligence, and now I use it every day in my business with Express for secure networking, communications, and another business I run where we promote fan club events for sports. And so that's one of the cool things about AI technology is you can be in any different business, yet AI is still applicable. It's just becoming mainstream in everything that you use day to day. If you guys called an Uber, if you guys went on public transportation, if you use Siri or Alexa or Cortana, you've used AI today. And I think one of my first experiences with Microsoft and AI was back in 2006. I was an intern at Microsoft, and I actually got to go to Bill Gates' house, have a barbecue there, which was a very cool experience. And as you walked into different rooms, it would face recognize you and actually adjust to your favorite music, change the color of the room, things like that as you're walking around. So we now see that, this light, this mood temperature, that's kind of commonplace now, but 10, 12 years ago, that was just very revolutionary. Now, we met with Satya Nadella, Microsoft's current CEO, about 3 years ago, my team at Microsoft at the time. And he said something to me that was kind of revolutionary. He said every single company today is becoming a software company. Now, if you think about this, right, traditional brick and mortar businesses like your bank, like the grocery store, like McDonald's, they're all using technology as part of what they operate to be more efficient, to be more productive. Now, I was actually listening to a speech a couple weeks ago, and he's changed that a little bit. He says today every company is becoming an AI company. And if you think about that, we're now at a point in time where AI has become so commoditized, so available that every company really can take advantage of it. And if you're not using it, you're just going to kind of fall behind in that curve. Now, I actually got to go to Microsoft last week. I still live out in Seattle, but I went to headquarters. And we got to do a tour of the retail stores, which is kind of their high-tech retail stores, a retail experience. And they have AI throughout this entire store. So there's a supermarket chain in Japan, where you walk down the aisle, and based on what you have on your smartphone, different lights will blink at different points in the aisle over the things which are on your shopping list, so that you can more easily go find your groceries to be more efficient. We see AI helping us every day. It's just making us more efficient in what we do, how we operate. But there's also the bad side of AI, ethics, which is one of the main things that we're going to talk about today. How do you know, for example, when you walk down that supermarket that the prices aren't changing based on what you wear, based on your profile, your watch, your previous spending habits? Wouldn't that be scary if the price that you pay at a supermarket is different than the price other people pay, just because of how much you can pay? Well, how do you guys know that's not happening today when you go shopping online? It could be, right? So this is one of the things that we have to think about as companies which are deploying and using AI, is how do we use it ethically? What are the best practices that we want to use? Now, AI and the ethics around it, they've actually been around since the 1940s. So if you guys are science fiction fans, you may have heard of a guy called Isaac Asimov. And back in 1942, he put together the laws of robotics, which is, to paraphrase it, robots can't harm other people, robots have to accept human commands, robots have to self-preserve themselves, as long as those don't contradict any of the other things. And so even before AI became a formal discipline, which happened in the 50s, people were already thinking about the ethics of AI, how we can actually build a society to integrate it, but still make it safe for humans. You know, a lot of people come up with these doomsday scenarios, right? Is Terminator going to take over the world with Skynet? Is the Matrix going to happen where, you know, AI feeds off humans? Well, I don't think we're ever going to get to a point there, because we're always going to build safeguards. We're always going to build controls in the system. And ultimately, AI is based on humans programming it, right? If you kind of think about what AI is, the root of all intelligence, whether that's computer intelligence or human intelligence, is pattern recognition. And that goes back to one of the guys who was famous for quoting that is a futurist called Raymond Kurzweil. He's a very famous technologist. And he said the root of all intelligence is pattern recognition. And if you kind of think about that, that's true in different aspects. When we think that somebody's smart in academics, are they good at math or chess? Or if they're a good doctor, are they good at recognizing you know, oddities in the human body and identifying a pattern there? And the thing to keep in mind is that intelligence just isn't focused on academic subjects. Being able to pattern recognize, being able to adjust yourself helps in all different aspects of life. For example, people say LeBron James is a very intelligent basketball player because he recognizes patterns and can respond to them faster than other people. So keep that in mind. The core thing behind artificial intelligence is the ability to recognize patterns and know how to respond to them as fast as possible. Now, we're coming to a time where we're seeing technology speed up so exponentially. We're seeing all of these different components, these building blocks throughout the technology industry that AI really has become commoditized in the last couple of years. Like even 3 years ago, you couldn't go and plug into an image recognizer that was publicly available on the cloud. You know, over time, we started with computer code. We got fast networks. This created massive amounts of data. We then started having cloud infrastructure, dynamic virtualization, servers that can move around and expand and grow capacity. We're now at the point where we have these building blocks in place that we're now able to commoditize AI, meaning you can go and hook up into Microsoft Azure or AWS or a cloud service, and they already have these AI tools built in, image recognizers, processing, natural language processing. So we've really come to a point where anyone in the room can go take advantage of AI. In maybe 15 minutes, it'll take you to set up. That's really cool. That's pretty revolutionary. And it's given businesses the opportunity to use it in everyday life now. So kind of the questions that we start to ask ourselves now is AI in the enterprise safe? What responsibilities do businesses have when they're using AI? What's ethical? What's not ethical? So about a month ago, Deloitte Consulting, they did a nationwide survey. They interviewed 1,100 senior managers, executives of company which were using artificial intelligence. And they asked them, what are the biggest threats? What are the biggest problems that you see? The number 6 on the list was just the ethics, the core, can we do this? Is it right for our business to do this? Number 5 was these AI companies feared that they would lose customers. Number 4, they feared that AI would fail on a mission-critical system. Think about autonomous vehicles that are driving people around. Sometimes bad things happen. That happened in the last year with one fatality. There's the legal responsibility for AI actions. Number 2, the wrong strategic decisions. Do you take that data, adjust your business accordingly, and it's wrong? But the number 1 fear that people had, enterprises had around AI, was cybersecurity. Trusting AI to make decisions around your security. Trusting data, what should be protected. Trusting networks, what can be transmitted or not. And a lot of businesses that are using AI have to ask these questions. So for example, is it ethical or unethical for us to block the communications of a known terrorist? Is it ethical to block a cyber attack? What about in the business world? Should you allow your stock transactions to go through faster than a rival's stock transactions? So anytime that we're looking at AI doing these processes, it really does open up a lot of questions. Now, probably one of the more familiar ones that you guys see, right, is use of data, right? How is data protected? How are machines using it? Can people scrape it? Can people access it? Now, if anyone in the room's used Google, Facebook, Yahoo, Slack, your account's been hacked in the last 5 years. All of these public cloud providers have lost customers' data. They're not managing it on secure networks. Billions of accounts have been hacked. And so ultimately, the challenge is, with a lot of these public cloud services, the data is not being protected effectively. Now, probably the best example, 2 minutes. Best example here is Cambridge Analytica. If you guys know what happened in the election, this organization scraped data from about 50 million users on Facebook. They used AI to profile what people's political stances were, and based on that, they would display different ads to those people, based on AI defining, is this person more likely to be Republican or Democrat? Some people said that swung the election. So is that ethical, using profiling technology? So there's a lot of things that businesses have to do, but ultimately the key things that Microsoft's been focused on, and they're one of the leaders in this industry, is they've defined what they call their AI principles: privacy, security, reliability, safety, transparency, fairness, accountability, and inclusiveness. And so as our own company, Express, what we do is we provide secure messaging, a secure network, and productivity tools which run on top of that network. So think of it like Slack, but in a more secure cloud that runs in your own data center. And we've had to go through some of those same challenges. How do we go prioritize communication? We treat everything fairly. How do we go and control user data? How do we do end-to-end encryption? And ultimately, what we want to do here is we don't want to have machines decide how people should handle their own data. That's been a decision we've made. We want to empower people and organizations to run their own data, manage it, use it as they see fit. What we're using AI for is to optimize business operations, like calling your Uber so it meets you before your cross-town meeting, like reminding you when you have to send an email, streaming other types of communication. So hopefully that kind of gave you a quick preview of artificial intelligence, ethics, how it works in society, how it works in businesses. And if you want to learn more from myself, from the Express team, we're going to be around later today. We are actually just coming out of stealth mode as a company, but we have developed what we believe is the most secure network on the planet with a lot of productivity tools. So if you'd like to learn more, please check out our website, express.ms. And we are interested in speaking to any technology partners, investors, or influencers in that space as well. With that, I also want to thank our sponsors, Microsoft, MacArthur in English, and of course, Disruptive Technologists. Thank you.
So without further ado, well, thank you, Simon, for that. That was a good preview of some of the topics we'll talk about tonight. I thought rather than introduce the panelists, I would let them introduce themselves. We have a fantastic panel, quite mixed backgrounds, some Microsoft people, some others. So from my left, Tamika, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Tamika Vazquez. Very nice to see you all. So I do a few things currently full-time. I'm working for a company called Eigen Technologies. So they focus on natural language processing, which is a subset of artificial intelligence. And we're based out of London and New York. I'm the Associate Director of Marketing. I do marketing and business development strategy. Outside of that, I'm an adjunct professor at St. John's University. I teach out of the Peter Tobin School of Business. And outside of that, I do a couple of advisement for various startups, some lecturing, some guest speaking, and things like that.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Manoj Inaudi. I'm a senior data scientist at a company called Rocket Trip. It's sort of in gamifying business travel space, and we try to help companies spend less on business travel by incentivizing their employees to take cheaper options. Outside of that, I've worked on projects in like sort of data science or tech for social good. I got my start working at the Data Science for Social Good Fellowship at University of Chicago back in 2013, where I got to help build like a natural language processing system to help Red Cross and other first responders during disasters by I did finding useful information in social media, and I've worked on other projects relating to like combating human sex trafficking and also how can we help the UN and refugee crisis stuff.
Fantastic. Thank you. Claudia.
So I stumbled in my first AI course in '95. I was very young. And back then it was definitely not a very sexy topic that everybody wanted to talk about, just a bunch of weird geeks, really, interested in esoteric topic. Since then, I spent a good 6 years at IBM Watson, working with predictive modeling there. Then, talking of full-time jobs, was chief scientist of an ad tech company, kind of in the process of automating very large predictive models, kind of doing this kind of targeting. I'm since then kind of moved on, and I'm kind of putting my foot in the water in financial industries. But I've also had many hobbies, so I'm an adjunct at NYU, and there's a whole bunch of my students. Yep, thanks for coming, appreciate it. So to the rest of you, if you want to hire people who can actually manage data scientists, those guys. I've also worked with groups like DataKind and AI Now. I organized a conference around data science for social good back in 2014 here in New York City with about 2,500 people. So I'm generally interested to see where that field evolves and trying to be kind of part of the community.
A grades for all those students.
Yeah.
I have to see what it says up there, so I act accordingly.
It's all good.
Oh, that
Yeah.
version. So, hey guys, my name is Imran. I am part of Microsoft's customer success unit, focused on financial services. Right now, I've been part of the enterprise strategy program before, and in the past, I've had the privilege of being, unlike Al Gore, the father of the internet, at least in Pakistan. So I am the founder of the .pk CCTLD there with my friend and partner, as well as the credit card industry in that country of 160 million people where interest is not allowed, but credit cards are. And generally, I'm basically very driven by innovation, making the world a better place. And so whatever I do, I strive to just stick to something that I coined as my personal motto in 1979 when I was a teenager. I won't tell you what teenager. And that is change the world bit by bit, bite by bite. And that's with the computer thing, but since there's pizza outside, take your pick. Thank you for having me.
I'm Hugh Seaton. I'm CEO of Aquinas Learning. We're an AI and learning company. Founder of the Practical AI Meetup Group in New York, San Francisco, Toronto, and Boston. Have been doing a lot in the AI and actually VR space for the last couple of years, and excited to be with this panel.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. And we heard about you earlier, but I've got a burning question.
Sure.
Does Bill Gates have good music taste?
Nice. I have good music taste, so it worked out in the end because it changed to my electronic music, so we were good.
Fantastic. Good answer. So, I'm Oliver Christie. I won't talk about myself. I think you know who I am. As a disclaimer, I've worked with most of the companies we're going to talk about, including Opus and quite a few DoD things. But that won't bias my questions. Now, we're also going to have a disclaimer, which I know you don't normally have. But we're talking about some fairly sensitive things. We're talking about ethics. And ethics is a prickly subject, but it should be talked about. So we're in the Microsoft building in New York, and I think we should talk about Microsoft. We should talk about politics. We should talk about the hard subjects. So with this in mind, the panelists are here as individuals. They're not representing a company. Their views are their own. These are not the views of any particular company. So keep that in mind. Yes, exactly. So I want this to be an open and honest conversation. There's not enough of this happening. So the first subject, talking of spiky subjects, let's talk about war. Let's talk about killing machines. I think some of us have built them. Some of us are involved in DoD projects right now, including Microsoft. So Microsoft is bidding for the Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure Project, or JEDI, $10 billion cloud infrastructure to be used by the DoD for all sorts of things. Jeff Bezos has said we need to be in every field of AI, and this includes defense. So, for the panelists, do you think this is it's ethical to be working for a company who is building AI that can have a DoD use or a offensive or defensive use? So let's go from this end and we'll go along.
It's tough, but I will say, if anything, the companies that have pulled out of initiatives like that, from what I've seen, it's been generated by their employees. So I think it's an interesting spin to ask, would you work for that type of company, or should you work for that type of company? I don't know, because I think the fact that there's so many unknown sort of factors that come along with any sort of government initiative, I think is very scary. But to the extent that you are aware of the application, and to the extent that you are aware of all of the connected bodies to whatever that application would be, I would say would be the first step as an employee, as a prospective employee of any company that has the power to force any sort of change for something as lethal as war.
So I guess I do agree with what Tamika said about how the companies that pulled out this is because of the employees are not comfortable with this. And so I do think that's a very important part. If you don't want your company to engage in this kind of work, you need to be able to basically raise these red flags in a safe environment. I do think that's something that's becoming more important, that as we build data science or machine learning or AI products that can effectively harm people, that it's more easy for people to be able to raise flags or concerns without losing their jobs. And then I guess the second question is should we actually be doing this? I think that's a hard question, but I do think if the companies do agree to do this, then we need to very specifically define this is the use case of this technology. It can only be used for this, this, and this, and it cannot be used for these other purposes. Both from an ethical perspective and also a technological perspective, in the sense that if you try to use these technologies outside of the scope it was initially designed for, you can get these unexpected results or these unknown results that could result in disasters.
So I think on one level, this is a very personal question that I think everybody has to answer for him or herself. And it is easy to proclaim a stand here, and I could tell you what I would or wouldn't do, but then, so I personally have chosen certain parts of my career based on ethical grounds, and I certainly applaud people who have not just raised their voice, but potentially also kind of left behind a job when they felt that was not okay. But I can flip it around. I think there is the societal question: what, as a large society, we should allow ourselves where money should go, what we should be building or not be building. And that's not to blame the AI engineer who sat down there, who did this for a living because he didn't know what else to do. Arguably, as an AI engineer, you couldn't do many things. But in principle, I think blaming it on the algorithm or the people who built them is far too easy and very often done. There is the other side of me saying, okay, let's assume Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, and all these people who actually know what they're doing pulling out. Who the hell is going to build it then? Because it will be built.
It will be built. Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that world is kind of more reassuring to me. And I think the only way around it, aside from the kind of personal judgment, is to have an open, much broader conversation of how responsibility in the usage and kind of incorporation of an AI should be handled. And this is not just about the ethics of the AI people. It's an ethical question to all of us.
That really is a great question to start the event with, because all the other questions will be a lot easier after this. Since we're sitting in Microsoft's office and I do work my day job, and it's after 5 p.m. now, I think from the Microsoft perspective, obviously, I would say that one of the best things that has helped me understand the position of the technology industry and of Microsoft has been to read a blog by the Microsoft president, Brad Smith, who's also a brilliant legal mind. And in that, he explains the reasoning and the logic behind why Microsoft will bid on that contract, et cetera. And from my own personal side, I grew up in Pakistan during the 1965 war and the 1971 war with India. So I literally have had two homes that were hit by stray bomb and a stray missile. So I know the direct impact of war, so I always think of war as a last resort. But at the same time, the world is not a perfect place. There are just wars that have been fought, without which the world would be a terrible place, whether it was the Civil War for the abolishment of slavery, to the liberation of Europe with the Second World War, or even Kuwait and other places. Having said that, the brave men and women who serve in the armed forces of their great nations, they obviously do so at great peril to themselves because they believe in a cause. So it is our duty, I think, especially as citizens of whatever country we are in, to do our best to support them, to give them the best tools to do what they were chosen to do and what they chose to do, which is to even die fighting for us. So if that is the framework that we look in, war itself is as old as mankind. And even the philosophical and ethical questions around that are several millennia old. And at the end of the day, yes, we are here to discuss AI and the ethics of AI in the war machine. But even if I was producing high-quality metals that could be used in guns or bullets, how is that a different discussion? You're still contributing to the killing of another human being. So I think we need to analyze the AI implications on war, especially if the risk of machines making a decision to quote-unquote start a war or to start killing, et cetera, based on some algorithm comes in. Definitely something we need to be cognizant of, something we need to be understanding, and to build safeguards around. But just to label AI or anybody participating in the AI support of, or any technology support of war technologies would be foolish. Microsoft itself, in this case I'm speaking as a Microsoft sort of viewer. Microsoft is an American-founded company with headquarters in the US, and it owes a debt of gratitude to the many veterans who work in this company. And so for Microsoft not to support that, or any technology company not to support it, and to do so with an open dialogue, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, all of the above, them being absent from the table will not drive the conversation. Things will still happen. They'll happen in the shadows. And at least in this country, we have the opportunity to try to set rules that are right.
Hugh, what do you think?
Two quick points then.
Please, yeah.
So one of them is, if you're not at the table, you don't have a voice. So I think that technology isn't a binary thing. You can make things one way or you can make them 50 other ways. So by being involved in a company that's engaged in doing things for DoD, you have the opportunity to have a voice about how it gets executed, not just whether it gets executed. So that would be my first reason. The second one is that to the degree we may have had a little hiatus from great power competition, that's kind of over now. So the United States, it will matter. The degree to which we are at the forefront of AI in a strategic way is going to matter, and I would want to be part of that. I wouldn't want to wake up in 2030 and realize, wow, we lost something before we knew we were in it, because we kind of are. So I would want to be part of that to the degree I could.
I mean, I think the question is, you touched on this a little bit with the bullet manufacturers. Where do you draw the line, right? What if you design software and that's used to run AI, that's used to kill people, right? What if you build hardware? You build networking infrastructure, you build semiconductors, you write code, right? There's so many different components that go into building AI which have been laid on top of each other over the last 50 years. Where do you stop? Where do you draw the line, right? I did virtualization at Microsoft. That's used in AI. Hey, does that mean that I participate in that? So that's kind of the first question. I don't think you can draw the line right. Even people do an AI-specific thing like image recognition. What type of image are you recognizing? Is it a gun? Is it not a gun, right? I mean, these people are doing image recognition for genuine things. Does that mean they're now a bad person because their technology has been reapplied? But I think really, ultimately where we do have to draw the lines is AI should be making recommendations, but not making the decision, right? Because when you go through an AI process, you train it, AI makes a recommendation, and then it can make a decision, or the human can get involved and make the decision. I certainly think when we come to acts of war, that's where we do always have to have that human involvement at the end.
So you'd suggest a human-in-the-loop approach is the way of squaring the ethics? The end result is with the human?
I think there's at least having a human stakeholder there. Then it avoids one of those top risks that even the enterprise said, right? What if AI makes the wrong decision, right? And ultimately, you don't want to be accountable for bad code that's made that wrong decision. At least if there's a human there, well, there's someone to blame, but we have someone there.
Do you want to jump in?
Yeah,
Hugh, do you want to?
Let's go back.
Yeah, please.
What I would totally applaud that, and certainly as we deploy AI right now, certainly at the level of a startup and smaller company, humans have to be in the loop, just because AI is not that smart. But what happens in 5 years when you have an enemy who's deploying something that can think literally a million times faster than you can? It stops being tenable to have a human in the loop. And so what do? Do you say we're not going to do that like we banned chemical weapons? Maybe. I mean, I think that we may get there. Because ultimately, you can wind up with the equivalent of the stock market where everything's getting ratcheted down before anybody's even had their morning coffee. But who knows?
Exactly. Claudia,
So, I mean,
Regulation.
I've always kind of applauded the idea of the human in the loop. But by the same token, I think recently a lot of the discussions around ethics and especially biased decisions has led to the observation that people are pretty bad at decisions too. I mean, so in some ways, I think there's the practicality of the human in the loop. I mean, if we're getting to self-driving cars, I mean, it's actually the human explicitly not in the loop or semi in the loop if he's awake, presumably. So I do feel that it's unavoidable that things are being pushed in the realm where the decision is just literally directly connected to the output of the AI. It's not that the AI makes a decision, but there is a process that translates what the AI does into the decision that's coded by a person. Overall, I feel it's not realistic that everything will be human in the loop, and a lot of the examples we have seen comparing, computers are pretty good at stuff these days, and they're actually even better at being good people than people are often in some ways.
Bandit, you've worked with the Red Cross. I mean, you'd suggest that human in the loop is better, that we can be ethical, we can do great things. How was your work with the Red Cross and other groups? It's almost it's the opposite of war, if you like, but it's a lot of working in those environments.
So I guess when you work with nonprofits, I don't want to sort of replace them. I don't want to come in and tell them your process sucks. This is how you should do it with AI now. And the idea is we want to use AI to make recommendations. We don't want to make decisions. And so with the Red Cross work I've done, for example, it's sort of giving them more additional information about what's going on at the scene of a disaster. It doesn't tell them you have to go here or you have to go here. It tells them, okay, here are additional data points. Or here is where someone's injured. Here's where there's a fire, kind of thing. And so they can still use that information, but they're the ones making the decisions, not the AI telling them you have to go here, you have to go there.
Would you suggest that the Red Cross was guiding you as to what should be done with data and AI, what should be built? Were they the ethical leaders, or was the leader of the Red Cross saying, this is our mission, this is what we should do? Or was it you, as a data scientist, taking on that role?
It was a lot more back and forth conversations where it's they sort of have this idea of what they want, and we do this back and forth of this is what we think we can build, this is what you need, and we try to sort of meet in the middle of what is ideal for them and then what's also practical, and also talk with not just the head of the Red Cross or the director of the Red Cross at Chicago, but also meeting with local volunteers of what do they need as well and what are their big problems.
Tamika, you mentioned marketing. You mentioned that ethics might be a marketing, it's going to be in marketing. As we talk about AI generally, how is it the ethics part going to be shaped? I mean, this is the CEO of Microsoft asked us to have this discussion. Microsoft are fantastic at selling things. Do you think they're going to be selling ethics next?
Well, that's the thing. There are a few different themes there, right? Because digital activism has become a thing, right? So I think we're starting to see a world shape where people want to talk about more than just consumerism. They sort of want to talk about meaning. And so from the marketing perspective, it's always about telling that story. That's the core of anything. Before you sell a product or a service, you have to figure out what's the story that you want to tell. And so as we talk about, I guess, any ethical topic, It always begins with what's the actual decision you are trying to make. If you start there, you figure out what's the story I have to tell you so you understand that there is a way to make this decision, maybe a better way to make this decision. So, I mean, that's really the marketing perspective. I think the one thing that, just hearing what everybody else said, the one thing that I do see a lot more value in these days is just kind of this knowledge value chain framework, where you start with data that's supposed to tell you something, but by the end of that process, where you turn that data into knowledge, you're ultimately supposed to derive some kind of value from that you can bring back to the data. And it's supposed to be this cyclical sort of process. And I think as marketers, as people who really are in charge of selling things, selling ideas, you have to be able to take that knowledge, apply it in a new light for different people, for different reasons, in different contexts, and make sense of it. So yeah, I mean, storytelling, looking at data, bringing out knowledge from it, all of these things, it doesn't matter what the conversation is, I think it's going to eventually lead us into more of an understanding around ethics beyond just consumerism.
So I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
Do you think the ethical AI company is going to do better or worse financially over the next decade than the unethical AI company?
That's really, really hard to say.
I'm not going to call it the Facebook question,
Yeah.
but
So that's the thing, because ultimately, how do we even begin to challenge any company on their ethics or lack thereof? It's only when they face these sort of public scandals or when they, fall into these blunders that they're forced to answer certain questions. So I would say I don't know whether the ethical or unethical company will win in the end because it's subject to opinion. But I do think we are starting to pay a lot more attention, and I encourage people to pay a lot more attention to what's going on, what are the applications of this technology that very, very few people actually understand the full breadth of. So I think that in the end is what's going to make the difference, is the extent to which there's a transparent kind of dialogue happening between companies and the public.
let's talk about that transparency, but think about it in a global way. And this is for anyone who wants to jump in. Amazon, Microsoft, Google are global companies. And yet, our militaries are American, Chinese, Russian. How does that shape out? You have companies who are building very different AI technologies and countries who've got very different ideas about power structures. Now, would you back China? Would you back America in this arms race that seems to be happening?
You're not asking me.
I am asking you, yeah.
So let me speed dial Satya and ask. I think I want to say two things on that. One is, and if I may just go back to one point that was made earlier, there are situations where you have to let AI make the decision without the human intervention. If anybody remembers the movie Top Gun, that is now 30 years old, when two fighter pilots are approaching each other, they're doing so at a close rate of about 1,500 to 3,000 miles per hour. And in that time, it takes 1,000th of a second for you to decide whether you should shoot or not. Those are the situations where you will have to let even capable experts get out of the way of the machine to respond. So I just want to make that point earlier. In terms of this particular question, I think one of the challenges big business has faced recently and technology companies are facing a lot is the accusation that they are beginning to circumvent the sovereign state. So it's not so much about backing any particular state. It's almost the thinking in some elements, especially in more traditional minds in old politics and government, is that the risk to them is that tech companies are becoming so big that they're rendering the power of the sovereign state and the president or the prime minister or whoever, they're rendering it obsolete almost. So that's the bigger threat to them than the countries against each other. Now, militarily, obviously, they're all competing to try to win these tools. So it's kind of a love-hate relationship as far as I see them playing with us. Techies is that they can't get this ultimate power they're all hungry for world domination, while they're attacking techies for basically dominating the world without ever lifting a gun or firing a bullet. And that's the challenge that we face as techies is how do we defend our nations, make the world a safer place for everybody, do so without being accused of being world dominating, but also prevent the world domination and the subjugation of humankind. That is our ethical responsibility, no matter what company we're in.
To that kind of point. I don't know, saying that I would back one or the other when I'm an American citizen. I think does speak at least some of that answer. But also, these companies are subject to the laws of where they're originated and certainly where they're headquartered. So I think that has a big impact. And maybe not as much as it will as the government starts to understand what the power of some of these technologies. Certainly, encryption has been a thing since forever. Presumably, there will be kinds of AI that they get a little bit smarter about in 20 years or so. But I think that you where you're situated and where you're from really will dictate what you're able to do outside of that home country.
You seem to be suggesting that the AI we think about, the ethics we think about, are a reflection on the society we live in. Do you think we need a UN of AI, or do we think the UN actually could debate this successfully or not?
I think unquestionably conversations like this should be happening a lot at various levels. I think there's no practical limit to how much the government should be paying attention to this because they're not paying. We've seen Zuckerberg's conversations with them, and that was revealing. I think that we should be having this conversation now before we have the architecture for an AI that can do more than they currently can, so that when that does come about, and we don't know when it'll be. We don't know when.
And on this exact point, this is for everyone on the panel, what's the one thing you tell Congress or Washington right now, if you've got a direct line to someone in power?
Wow. I have a lot to say, but I guess, if we're talking about a world of artificial intelligence, I'll say just understand artificial intelligence could very easily become artificial stupidity if we're not careful.
Do you think we're not there already?
We're getting there, but I think the problem, to your point, is because I just don't see enough involvement, to Hugh's point as well, on the public sector side of the equation in understanding not only who's behind these technologies, but how they truly work. It's embarrassing to see the sort of questions that come out of the Senate as they question various leaders in technology. I mean, questions as far as how do you make money as a social media network is insane. That for that to come from a senator, I think is a bit embarrassing. So yeah, I would say we're getting there slowly, but we're still far away from that world of total tech domination, so long as the government is aware of where they have to intervene.
Yeah. Amanda, what do you think? Is it a case of education? And what would you say to your senator?
If I could talk, is this on? Is this on? Okay. I guess if we could talk to a senator, I sort of want to talk about, there's GDPR in the EU, and one of the things I really like about GDPR is sort of this right to explainability, this right to, that if an algorithm makes a decision about you, you're able to ask, why did this algorithm make this decision for me? Why was I denied this credit loan? And I would love to see something like that in the US, that any time an algorithm makes some decision for a person, that person is able to ask, why did it make this decision for me? Because I think one of the big issues now is that, okay, a lot of AI models are sort of like neural networks for random forest, where we don't really understand the internals of why it makes a specific decision. We sort of just know it took some input, does some mathematical optimization, answer comes out, but we don't really understand what caused that answer to appear. And I do think better sort of requiring companies to actually look into why does their model do what it does is going to be one step into democratizing AI, or better protecting people or vulnerable groups from the harmful effects of AI products.
So I'm certainly totally on board with education and kind of explainability. Maybe I'm slightly less optimistic about either. For the following reason, I think education is one thing, but it's wishful thinking that you believe that you can just teach any senator enough that they know what to do about AI. I don't think that's realistic. And we have a huge talent problem that it's already an incredibly intense competition around talent that really understands the implications of AI just between those companies who build it. Good luck trying to go with that knowledge into, I commend anybody who wants to go with that knowledge into government and deal with green card issues and what else you have to deal with to get any attention. So I'm honestly worried about the few interactions I've had with benign things like the Trade Commission that don't really understand how targeting works either. Not to talk about kind of other more kind of important things. On the explainability, I think part of what we need to understand that there's just a limit. This stuff is often better than our brain. If I could explain what the algorithm did, then I didn't need it because it's actually better. And that's the value proposition. So I think having accountability as a standard that you can walk down is an important component, but it will never really provide a solution because there is a limit to what extent any of us, and I've built thousands of these models, and I don't really understand what many of them really do, and maybe I shouldn't say that, but I think that's a realistic part of kind of what standard can you even achieve? How good can this be? They will always make mistakes. There seems to be a wrong perception in the publicity that they will be perfect. No, they will always make some degrees of mistakes. The problem we're having is the type of mistakes AI makes is very different. Our brain is evolutionary built to anticipate people behaving a certain weird way, and we're kind of dealing with these types of mistakes. But the types of mistakes AI does are very surprising, and often we're mystified, and it takes us months to figure out what happened.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to ask you a similar but different question.
Let me answer this.
Okay, please. Could I get you to answer it in two ways? One is if you're talking to a US senator, and one is if you're talking to a Pakistani senator.
And see, I'm a Gemini, I love two of everything. So one is regarding the ethics of AI, etc. If somebody or a company is not ethical in whatever way they do business, they're not going to be ethical with AI. Two, artificial intelligence will not fix natural stupidity. And the third part of the answer goes to what you asked about, which is, yes, it's going to be very hard to educate them, etc. But if I had my way, I literally would say when we joined Microsoft, my colleagues and I, we go through orientation. Anybody who's joined any company will go through orientation. You'll take some courses or education about company's philosophy, architecture, systems. I almost would require anybody becoming a senator from 2020 onwards to have to sit through, even if it's 20 or 30-minute little videos of AI, technology, the impact of war, economics, clean water, poverty, whatever it is. If it's like a 5 or 6 hour certificate, you don't get it, you don't get to be seated in the Senate or the Congress, and it doesn't matter what country on the planet you're from.
You're saying 2020, you think 2019 is too early for someone to sit through?
2020 has a nicer ring to it because politicians think in terms of elections.
Yeah, exactly. Hugh, you help educate corporations as to how senior management should be thinking. Is it really the same? Could you have the same conversation that you have there with our politicians? And does ethics come into it?
Yes and no. Just quickly, what we do is we don't hit ethics usually straight up. It's more how to treat people. So it's a subset, especially when it comes to coaching and getting the best out of your people. I think no. So I think the position vis-a-vis a senator or a rep is you're going to get a little bit of time instead of forcing them to take the course that, the compliance or whatever it is. The first thing I would do, though, is tell them this is moving faster than any other similar technology in history. And it doesn't have to get theoretically very much better or any better to change society right as it is now. It's just not implemented across as many places. I think we've heard this expression. In fact, you said it but Mark Andreessen said a similar version that software is eating the world and AI is eating software. And since it's already eaten the world once, it'll happen 10 times faster because there's the groundwork played. So the fact that it's happening faster than anything you're used to. Too many of our elected officials are a little older and they're used to things taking a decade or two to really see an impact. And every successive wave of technology has been compressed from the one after it because each of them is an enabler for speed. So they make the one after them even faster. So I think that the speed is something they just have no intuition for. And to the degree we can wake them up to that, I think that'll matter. The other thing I would say is start thinking now about the areas where AI could unintentionally do damage. So if we put it in charge of the Hoover Dam, and it decided it got the wrong idea, it could cause real trouble. How do we put a fail-safe in there? And we don't know that we have the answer so much as sometimes it's government's job to demand an answer be produced by someone else. But at least they're thinking like that.
Simon, you mentioned Hollywood. You mentioned the Hollywood version of AI. the Terminator, the killer robot that goes crazy. Do you think that's a good starting place for how we talk about AI publicly? And to senators, I mean, is it just the wrong starting point?
I mean, I think the doomsday scenarios are somewhat extreme, right? One of my favorite hypotheticals, going back to this whole decision making, and does this lead to a doomsday scenario, is imagine if we gave AI the ability to fire weapons. We also gave AI the ability to say, if you're going to be attacked, you should attack first. How do we know that the AI is not going to think that attack is inevitable? The AI is not going to actually start the war that was never going to exist in the first place, except AI existed. So that's one of the scenarios, that a lot of people bring up about, can we ever get to these doomsday scenarios? I mean, it's a tough one, right? It's all hypothetical. I think Hollywood naturally has to overly emphasize any point, right, to make it fresh. If we had AI scenarios like, some crops died. Maybe that's not going to be like a great Hollywood movie, right? You got to have Terminator, you got to have the high body count, machines eating humans like from the Matrix, that type of thing. So I think it is overly sensationalized, but it's something that we always have to think about, right? How do we avoid these long-term scenarios from happening?
Fantastic, thank you. Well, talking about the machine eating us all, let's move to government and regulation. Do we think this is something that can be regulated? To give a little bit of context, the two quotes that are up there. The first from OpenAI is there's been a bill in front of Congress recently, a control bill which basically says if you have AI technologies which are dual purpose, then it should be registered. Dual purpose means it's in the public domain for something commercial, but it can also have a military application. This could potentially mean pretty much all good AI. So that's the first question. Strange enough, that was only in front of Congress for 1 week, which is strangely short. The second is the EU has a working group, and they're talking about AI regulation, a little on ethics, and how it relates to the EU as a whole body. I'm not sure where Britain stands in that, but we shall see. Do we think AI can actually be regulated at all? Is it something we can really put a pause on? Or is it, by its very nature, impossible to actually regulate? Tamika?
I think the one thing that I find really fascinating about artificial intelligence is really the paradox that it presents us every single time, which is you can have a very good outcome, right, if used properly, and you can have a very bad outcome. You constantly live in that paradox. And so if you're able to look at regulation as an opportunity to kind of dissect that paradox and just take care of the areas where it can really do some damage, then it becomes a little bit easier to start having that conversation. So I think of it in terms of sectors, right? If you look at education, if you look at financial services, you look at the consumer markets, you look at the criminal justice system, right? So if you look at it through the sector by sector kind of viewpoint and you see the paradox that that presents, you see that there's a way, let's say with education, there's a way to accelerate the pipeline of a child going from kindergarten to landing, in the right college and then moving on to have a thriving career. Or you see the other pipeline, which is predicting where that child is going to end up before they even have a chance to define their own lives, right? Simply by using data the wrong way, simply by applying algorithms where they don't belong. So if you look at it from a sector by sector sort of scenario and you are sensitive to the paradox, I think there's always opportunity for regulation because you would just go down to the root of the issue of where you see this can easily go badly and then put the preventative blocks in place so that mess doesn't have to be cleaned up later.
Fantastic, thank you. So, can we regulate AI?
So I think we can regulate parts of AI, and so one thing I do talk about is like this idea of algorithmic fairness. And I do think there are issues of like trying to create hard regulations around algorithmic fairness, because usually those are sort of like, we have some statistical metric that sort of says how fair your algorithm is, whether it be like false positive rate across different groups of people, or this calibration measure. And all of those system metrics can sort of be gamed. Like there's a way to sort of cheat and get that metric down to an acceptable level, but be doing something terrible. And so I don't think you can sort of come up with hard regulations like that. But I do think we can come up with sort of like software regulations of like, this is how we evaluate our AI products. So for example, with cars, with crash test dummies, in the past, like crash test dummies were had prototypically male features, and it turns out that these cars were actually, when accidents occur, like women and small children were like severely injured during these accidents because the cars were only tested against like these adult male dummies. And so regulations basically said that you have to test on different like crash test dummies of different body types and body shapes in order to better create cars that are more resistant against, I guess, when the accidents occur, that they more protect general group people. I think the same thing with AI. So one example is that like commercial face detection algorithms, for example, it was historically shown by some researchers at MIT that these work very terribly at predicting, recognizing the faces of black women compared to, like, say, white men or even white women or black men. And so I think that's something we need to that's something we can actually do with regulation. We can say, like, when you evaluate an algorithm that's designed for the general public, these are sort of the cross sections you have to look at and show that, okay, it does work against these good cross sections. And so it's not going to fix the problem, but sort of going to make you less terrible. And I think we can start doing that.
No, thank you. And I mean, I like the crash test dummy example, partly because they never have hair. So I'm safe. But I think it's a good point. I mean, it's thinking about the wider scope of the data that's being used. Data use, and can we regulate? I mean, how would you look at regulation?
So I do like, in principle, things like GDPR as a form of regulating just kind of the flood stream of data coming in there. And I think for a lot of applications, we don't have to hyper-personalize stuff. I mean, it may be very convenient for marketing and others, but ultimately, I think there's so much downside on a societal basis when you think of filter bubbles, when I'm only shown the information I will be kind of happy to see, and I'm entirely losing a perspective how wrong I could possibly be in the process.
Can you give an example where that type of hyper-personalization breaks down or isn't useful?
Well, it's useful if you want me to spend more time on the site reading more stuff I like to read. It is harmful in me losing the perspective that it looks like, well, obviously it's that position is right, because you never hear a critical voice about it. And there have been very interesting analyses. Gilad Lutan had a beautiful visual of how a incident that happened in Palestine was then reported on by the Israeli and the Palestine in a totally different way. And of course, every side only reads the stuff they want to read. And I think we see the much more kind of extremist positioning we see even in the US politics, and it happens in Europe just the same way. And to some extent, I can't help but feel that we're losing our humbleness about the limits of knowledge because we are not used to be exposed to these things. Our brain just doesn't keep up with it. So back to your question, I honestly believe that data should be regulated and that maybe less data in free flow ultimately on a societal level would be good. I also totally agree that on a broad topic like AI, we haven't really defined AI. I mean, let's face it. So far, what are we? So if you set out with we want to regulate AI, we'll still be debating 20 years from now. I think we really have to be much more specific. Here are tools that right now affect us, whether this is recommender engines, whether this is the facial detection. And for those tools in the different areas where they're used, we should come to a societal agreement of what degree of fairness is necessary for us to feel comfortable with that, instead of trying to go with how do we regulate AI without it ever really been clearly understood what it even is. Because right now it's just such a hot topic that everything is called AI. Half of it is just pure automation. There's no AI to be seen by a wide stretch. But today, almost everything is looked at it this way, and I think that obscures the discussion often more than it helps.
So I'll ask for a rebuttal on two of those. Should we have less data? And how should we think about fairness?
I have an engineering degree that I've never used, but when I got started in engineering in the 1980s, when you wrote software, it was basically flowcharts or thinking in a flowchart that was best executed by a program. But when you look at the state-of-the-art technology today and what's coming, it's almost has the ability to take abstract thinking, even creating abstract art and painting now, as we've seen, and literally be able to turn our imagination into software. And one thing we do know is there is no limit to the human imagination. There's no way to control free thought. And when the technology is able to sort of replicate that, it is going to be impossible to regulate. And so I think where there are regulatory opportunities and necessities are in what data is collected and how it's used. And on the software side or the AI side, the use cases on how it's applied, the software, not the data. So we'll have to have regulation of the data and the use cases of the technology, or for example, genetic engineering, whether it's with your corn flakes or whatever you're eating, or it's like making a new type of baby in China. Those are you have to regulate the use cases, but you will never be able to control AI and the thinking behind it.
Fantastic, thank you. Hugh, we talked last week on some of these subjects, and you were a little more skeptical on AI and where we are. Do you think we can regulate what we've got, and do you think it's critical, or are we not really there yet?
Yeah. So what we were talking about, and actually what I would agree with you in that, I think you want to regulate specific tools and do things like regulate how accurate they need to be. More outcomes than means, because the means are moving all over the place, and you can always engineer another way around it. So like example is cars, autonomous cars have to be 99.9% accurate before we can let them out in the wild. I'm making that number up, but I think that sort of thing is valuable. What we talked about a little bit was the location of control. And are we okay with letting it be at the engineer's level, or should it be at the company, or should it be at society? And my argument was, at the engineer's level is trusting that all of these people, many of whom are barely making the product work, will think like that. And some examples were made of people who do, but I would say wonderful, and God bless them. But I wouldn't count on that number of people who are not aligned to be where you put your regulation. I think that Google is an example of sometimes you'll have a groundswell where people say, we don't do this, that's not who we are. But I just think you're risking too much. I also don't think that companies are where the locus of control should be. I think it needs to be government. And I say that because companies are wonderful when they're uncontested and they've got fat profit margins, but when the chips are down, they lay 14,000 people off.
For instance, yeah.
Just making a number up.
Symon, just to pivot to something which is similar. So AI at work, how it's going to affect the workforce, either inside Microsoft, outside, some of the products that are coming out next. What do you think some of the biggest impacts are in terms of the ethical component of the application of AI in the work environment?
I mean, I think you've nailed it up here, discrimination. You know, that's probably got to be the biggest thing, one of the toughest things that a lot of employers deal with. You know, I've personally hired several hundred people across my different businesses, and we've used some different tools that are highly automated. I wouldn't say AI, and I've definitely seen bias in them. You know, one of the most immediate things is just which college you went to, right? Did you go to a top 5, an Ivy League, right? Or one of those, right? Because sometimes that immediately cuts people off. Another example is just, you know, just walls, barriers to entry. Like if you don't have an MBA, even if you've been in business for 30 years and you have all those qualifications, you're immediately cut off. So I think AI is a tool, but like any tool, right, we still got to kind of draw those boundaries, figure out where it applies correctly, appropriately. And one of the big things, right, make sure you avoid discrimination. And that's going to be really tough with machines sometimes making those decisions for you.
Absolutely. Tamika, you've talked quite a lot on discrimination, especially when it comes to the workplace and hiring. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think with artificial intelligence, it really brings out where the gaps are with our society, right? And I think I check a lot of boxes, so I like to use myself as an example a lot. But you know, being a person of color, being a woman, being an immigrant, you know, certainly the world was not constructed with the likes of me in mind. And I think being able to use something like artificial intelligence to fill those gaps is going to be really important. One of the simple use cases that I could probably point out is when you think about the opportunities of just identity redaction and just being able to take out, the sort of things that could create bias very early on in that sort of pipeline as a prospective employee. So if you can take out my name, right? If you can take out anything that suggests my gender, anything that suggests my religious affiliation, anything that's sort of front and center, right? That whether you're willing to admit it or not could create some reaction of bias. If you can take that out and then automatically produce the best resume, then you shape the conversation differently as far as, what the future of work is going to be per the best qualified person, right? Because no matter how many times companies say that they're invested in diversity and all of these things, it's very hard to see clear-cut initiatives that are really moving in that direction. So I do think artificial intelligence presents this sort of, it's an opportune time to leverage the technologies that exist for reasons like, boosting diversity and furthering the future of work in that regard.
I'm going to put everyone on the spot. How diverse is your company? How much is it talked about? Is it tokenism, or is it people say, no, we need to be diverse so we have this spread of knowledge? Please. Yeah.
I'm probably the smallest company here. There's 10 of us, 7 depending on how you count it. And we've never made a point of diversity. We've never made a point of, and I've never made a point. I've just found that I had at one point an acting CTO who was African American. We've got a woman building all of our mobile. We've got a gentleman from Cuba who's now the CTO. It's just, it's easy because I'm small, but I didn't choose that. I didn't say, golly, I'm going to make a statement with my barely existing entity. But I just found that there are great people out there. And we happen to do a lot of events. We happen to be out in the world a lot. Obviously, I'm not looking for 400 people, so it is a little bit of a human thing instead of a statistical thing. But I found that by being out there a lot, you find a lot of talent and a lot of quality, and it does come on its own. When we're bigger, we'll have to be having the conversation you're talking about.
Claudia, how do you have, what does your team look like?
So I will talk about multiple experience I had. I was at IBM Research, and if you wear high heels in the hallways, I mean, people will kind of, because it's 90-something% men. By the same token, they were so pushy about making sure that I climbed the managerial ladder, which was supposed to be career advancing, that I basically left and said, look, I just like to sit down and fiddle around with data. Thank you very much. Can you just stop advancing my career for me, please? So the next startup, very fascinating how it played out. I was kind of head of data science. We had almost half and half women in data science. Engineering run by the CT or the VP of something, Indian male. I don't think a female programmer survived longer than 2 years in that organization. And it's kind of in the same building, in the same. It's really interesting how these social undertones end up playing out, especially in an early startup. If you say a good environment, good things happen. So I've had kind of an interesting perspective on that, and this is more about leadership. It's not about who do you hire, but how do you resolve kind of that culture, that structure in there. And what I've seen now in a financial world is there is, of course, a lot of homogeneity because they keep hiring friends of the people already have, right? And it's not that AI is biasing your applicants. I mean, good luck. If you're trying to hire applicants based off the friends of the people you already have, I mean, this is a sure way to homogeneity. So I've seen that play out as well. I think there's a lot of effort and consideration around it, but as long as the hiring process is based on recommendations and referrals, it's not going to happen.
Sorry.
Hi, Nikita. I'm Andy. I'm just going to get them ready. They're going to grab microphones and...
Oh, certainly.
And,
So we're going to shift to Q&A. So any questions you have, I'll ask you to state your question in the form of a question rather than a long statement. Yeah. And
That's great.
you can get personal about this, but let's be respectful. We know where we are. And
this is Nikita. That's Andy. She's
She's our social media person. He's our advisor.
Fantastic.
They're brilliant, but they're going to walk me through.
So we'll have 10 minutes of questions, and then we'll go for beer. So, questions? Yes, at the back.
Well, I'd like to talk from a couple of perspectives. I have a statement kind of question.
You have to be brief.
I want to make it brief.
Thank you.
I'm a veteran, and I don't know how many panelists have been involved with being in a war situation, okay? But when we talk about AI at war, my concern is more about the fact that you have global companies that will be, I guess you could say, suppliers to countries that are not the US, and how does that get handled? And I was wondering if the panelists would be able to talk on that aspect as to whether or not a company like Microsoft or Google or even Amazon should not be bidding for AI contracts in other countries because of the situation. We can go to war with anybody, even Canada.
You heard it here first. So if we're going to go to war with Canada, it's a good heads up.
That would be a real Cold War.
Yeah. Oh. So export controls. I think we know how export control works. Do you think it's possible with this technology anyway? I mean, it is happening to a degree.
So I think that's a great question, and thank you for your service. And part of the reason, as I mentioned earlier, Microsoft intends to support the JEDI initiative to the best of its capability is to ensure that the United States, where we're headquartered and where a lot of our, obviously, people like you have served in, are served in the best possible way. The challenge is, again, the raw materials, right? If you are creating high quality metal and it somehow finds its way through 3 different shipping channels to an enemy state, and they use it to build weapons that you did not sell them. In other words, we do sell weapons to allies, and then it ends up in other countries' hands. So those problems are there for a long time before the AI issue came. The challenge with AI is going to be, and I don't think you'll see many very American companies bidding to have the same level of contractual work done for a state that is not a friendly state to the United States. However, that does not end the risk. The risk is still, people will reverse engineer whatever you are doing. And so then the best offense in this case, or the best defense in this case, is still to continue to build the best that you can for your own homeland and for your own people. So that's one of the best ways to do that. Export control is one way, but again, with this hyper-connected world where things are so easily hacked and find its way into the wrong hands, I don't think that is the only thing you can rely on. No. So it will have to be very open dialogue between, and it's not just the government. I think somebody said earlier, I think it's going to be a circle, the intersection of 3 circles, which is the business, the government, and the public. And we in the United States are fortunate enough to have the military and the government that are supposed to be subservient to the people. So if all 3 work together, I think we can manage it better. We can't erase the risk, unfortunately.
I'll just follow up on that. I do some work for some fairly big DoD companies. It's something that's talked about very, very seriously. It's almost the first conversation that happens. There's a huge amount of vetting before you go into any room. It's something the DoD and or the large contractors, it's built into their DNA. So it's not an afterthought. It's not there as marketing. If you like, the ethics of this are taken very, very seriously because it's American lives. So the conversation is happening to make sure that you're not put in any more risk than you should be. Do you have another question? Yes.
Hey guys, I'm Ken. One of the topics I'm surprised that didn't come up is jobs. So jobs often decide elections in this country. Economic unrest can lead to wars. We've already seen how automation took away a lot of factory work. And I think this is just the beginning. We're going to see, for starters, millions of drivers, professional drivers lose their jobs. It could be in retail, could be restaurants, and it could also be white-collar jobs. So certain functions in accounting, bookkeeping, and so on can also disappear to AI. I was just wondering about your take on, how can we address that? And are there ways to take some of those people and retrain them with new skills that they might need to get a new job?
It was a very, very good question. We just didn't cover it just in terms of time. But I'll rephrase the question, and I'll be brutal about it. Job losses, do we care? Let's be honest about it.
Can you define we?
As a society, the technology is the thing that makes it happen, but as a society, do we care about large job losses? What do we think? Hugh?
Yes, we do, a lot. I think that every time you have a big technology like this, people are going to lose their jobs. It's not a question. It's a question of how much, which was kind of inherent in his question, but also speed. And I think that we cannot even consider, as a society, letting it just play out. Because the old expression, in the long run, you're dead. In this case, the disruption of our functioning, go to get milk at the corner store society is just, the risk is too high.
Except we are entirely letting it play out.
But the question is, what should we do? I would say that we should be, at one point, another administration had spoken about possibly making community colleges free, right? Something, whether it's that, whether it's whatever it is, even taking aside for a moment AI is replacing people, just AI, just the speed of change, people talk about it, skill half-life of about 5 years, which means after 5, it starts to really lose value quickly. So no matter what, people are on a skills treadmill no matter what you've done. People are even asking whether college makes sense. So I think it absolutely behooves us to look at this as an opportunity to rethink education from soup to nuts, and also really subsidize the fact that even if people didn't lose their jobs because they're a driver or whatever it might be, the education, their skill level now will not be the same in 5 years. So everybody has some level of need for this.
Thank you. Tamika, we've talked about this offline.
Yeah, we've talked about this quite a bit, because I think my biggest issue when it comes to this topic of jobs is that we tend to look at the world in a very binary way. And we're doing a very big disservice when we do that. So if we look at the world through the lens of public sector or private sector, Republican or Democrat, right? We are separating too much. And we're not coming together on an issue that everybody cares about, which is in this case jobs. So I think we have learned this lesson many, many times before. As you suggested, we've had so many industrial waves over the course of history, particularly here in the United States, that we don't have an excuse anymore as to how we're having this conversation. Personal opinion, I just think that if we're living in a world where we're sort of depending on nostalgia to drive us forward, and wanting to make places greater or great again as per some other time in history, we're never going to have the conversations that we need to have as far as what's actually happening today, what's actually relevant, and what's going to drive us for tomorrow. And I think government is in a very interesting position to have this conversation of jobs through the lens of augmentation and not so much us versus machine and all of this stuff. And I wish we were doing that more, but I certainly do care a lot about this.
So I went a couple of months earlier to an MIT conference on the whole topic, and I think if you're really trying to be technically honest about this, the reality is that while AI lets you kind of switch on the radio in the morning and do other cool stuff today, a lot of, other than the driverless cars and even there are arguments, I think the more realistic conversation is to have. This is not an AI problem. This is a much bigger societal problem that is driven by information and automation and many other things. It's not the facial recognition and the little box you can talk to that's going to kill our jobs. I think we do need to think as a society of how we see the future of work in general. The people I miss, remember these toll booths on the Whitestone Bridge? They're not there anymore. That's not AI. That's a little box that I glued to the front of my window. And this is driven by just the competitive pressure of making things more efficient. And that's the thing. As a society, we have to stop blaming AI for this. We have to actually face the reality that as things develop faster, it will hit everybody and for many other reasons than AI. And so I think the urgency cannot be overstated, and it can't be an AI conversation.
Simon, I'm going to pick on you. Is this a conversation you could have with Bill Gates?
You know, that was 2006, a little before that time. I mean, my thought, though, with it, right, is constantly retooling. Every technology company, business has to do that. People have to evolve. I think a good example that was very familiar to me was when people started moving to public cloud computing, public cloud technology. A lot of traditional tech people said this is going to replace our jobs. Well, what happened was there's more people doing cloud services than ever. They've just retooled from doing it in their own data center to doing it in the public cloud, but that skill's still going to be there. So for people needing to do imagery classification, doing a lot of these tasks which AI may take away, maybe it won't take away. Maybe it will open it up. Maybe there'll be more jobs because there'll be more of a need, more of a demand. Now, I don't think that, rote jobs or basic labor, probably that's going to get replaced. So it's not an easy question to solve, but transitions constantly happen with tech. We've seen it before. It's going to keep happening.
Fantastic. Imran, disruptive technology in customer success unit. What's the impact going to be?
As always, I'll add something to the previous answer. Absolutely. When we live in a society where ignorance is celebrated, where we've had presidents who have proudly stated they don't read newspapers, and literally people embrace ignorance and spread something they know is false, if you're living in that mindset and then get left behind, and this I'm saying as myself, not as a representative of any company, that's going to happen because you brought it upon yourself. And you cannot blame government, you cannot blame the opposite party or AI or technology. Enabling people to have affordable education so that they can move ahead, so that they're ready for the disruption and can adapt to it, that is our responsibility, not just as good citizens of whatever nation we're in, but even as businesses. Having said that, when all waves of technology have come, where people used to go in horse carriages, there were people who took care of the horses and the coach driver and whatever, they were disrupted by the automobile, I'm sure. Then the chauffeurs were disrupted by us driving ourselves, etc. These disruptions will happen. They will also be bigger than before, also because the population of the planet is much larger than before. But overall, give anybody the chance who wants to go back to a nostalgic time, if they want to live in the day and time when they could have died of disease, that they don't die of today, that when the electricity doesn't just shut off at random, even in developing countries like Pakistan, those are the good old days nobody wants to go back to. So what it is up to us is to say, take the opportunity to grow, because times of disruption, especially with disruptive technology, are times of opportunity, no matter what city in the world you are in, no matter what state of the United States you are in, if it's red, blue, purple, or any other color. And I'm wearing red and blue, so with a little bit of white. And that's really the opportunity. And how you do that is focus on what you are doing good today and see how would it fit in this brave new world, and then find that niche, because the technology is now so democratized, as I was saying to somebody earlier, with a credit card with a $5,000 limit and with all these AI tools available built into the cloud services of most of the companies, you could imagine a brave new business model, a brave new website, a brave new social network or whatever, and you could literally start it, put it on your credit card for $5,000 or less, and literally, if it takes off, you don't even have to go looking for VC funding to expand. So the opportunity is there, and the people who will do well and thrive in the next 10 to 20 years are the ones who are going to embrace that disruption. And that's why I love disruptive technologists.
Fantastic.
Just really quick, we still have time, I think it's up to Oliver. We still have time for a few more questions, but I just wanted to say that Sigrid is over there, our strategist. She's going to be leading the way to the Heartland Brewery, which is literally across the street. You can see it out the window. If anyone wants to meet with some of the panelists, I think some of them are going to be going. I know Bruce Epstein from ABUS, which is a big AI company, is going to be there. And there he is. Bruce. And I know that a couple of other people are going to be there. So enjoy. When you wrap up, you can follow her, or you can just go over there. It's just in the bar in the front area, and the directions are on the agenda. And just to interrupt, I think Sepp wanted to just say something or ask. Do you have a question you wanted to ask? You want to still ask it? Oh.
Right.
Well, I guess now I have two after that question. They were both kind of like follow-ups. The first on war, I was going to ask, or I guess point out, I know you were saying that you think it would be good for like AIs for war, or with potential for war, I should say, to be developed by their home nation, right?
By the good guys.
Like, yeah. But do you think that that kind of could potentially create an unequal distribution of AI, in that like heavily successful countries with large GDPs can create stronger AIs that make better decisions, and then ones with less can create AIs that make poorer decisions or more unethical decisions because there wasn't enough brain power working on them?
Can I? That already happens right now.
Yeah.
They have the bigger aircraft carrier, the faster
Yeah.
jets, etc., and then the rogue nations try to go nuclear. So I don't think the dynamic is going to change. And quite frankly, I'd much rather have a rogue state with AIs than a rogue state with nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Do you think that furthers that agenda though? Like whether like maybe a company like Google or a company like AWS or Microsoft would develop an AI for one of the smaller nations, or do you think that's a conflict of interest?
One of the points I might throw in, I've got I came loaded, is that AI isn't, it's not a thing you can put in a briefcase. Yeah. So that someone might make a really great model, but it's going to need care and feeding from an industrial complex. It's a little bit like when people would steal airplane designs and then try to reproduce it, but they don't have the metallurgy and all the thousands of other things that make it work. And you can see this in other air forces that have planes that are a fifth as good as the F-16. So I think you're right that you're going to see a stratification of countries in terms of how good their AI is. This idea of export control, the question is that going to impact the entire society, beyond the military? How well are they going to run their electrical grid? AI will absolutely have an impact on that. Is that something we'll be able to export, or will that have dual use? That's a really hard one to, and no idea.
I'm thinking on that note, why don't we call that a wrap, and have a drink, go and get beers, and talk on ethics and war.